Now, in my last video, I talked about why clients don't buy. 3 steps. First, they're not aware. So you make them aware. And even if you make them aware, they may, second level, go, I don't care. So they're aware, but they don't care. So you create a sense of urgency. And the third step is maybe they're afraid, they're scared. They're aware, they care, but they're scared. So the question then becomes, why are they scared? And so let's dig into this because I believe there's something called sales trauma. Yeah, I made that up. Sales trauma is much like personal trauma. Something happened to us that really has shaken our foundation in terms of trying something new or something different. So what happens? A lot of clients or customers, B2C rather, client B2B, something has happened to them in the past that has caused them trauma, and that trauma is holding them back from making a decision to move forward. Now, I've categorized trauma into 3 categories or 3 buckets. The first one is direct trauma, right? In other words, let's say you sell a software product, right? Oh, no, let's get simple. Let's say that you sell pools, right? You're a pool designer, pool builder, you sell pools. And the last time in their past house, when they dealt with a pool builder, it didn't go well. So they're thinking because of the trauma they had in their past experience, they're expecting that things aren't going to go well. So they're going to say, you know what? Nah, we're just not going to do it. Right? That's direct trauma. Then there's what I call adjacent trauma. Let's say that you sell landscaping, right? And again, you're selling landscaping and you're trying to sell them landscaping. Now, the problem is, the reason they don't want to buy from you is because they dealt with these pool builders, and that didn't go well. So working with, let's say, contractors is not something they like. In other words, the fact that they had an adjacent trauma, a bad pool building experience, now impacts how they make decisions today. Even if you have nothing to do with pools, you're selling a service, a contracting service that's adjacent, similar to what the other contractors offer. And they're going, you know what, we just don't want to deal with contractors. The third type is what I call recency. Maybe they heard something, they read an article, or they talked to a friend recently that said, you know what, every time we try to do this, it didn't go well. So they hear that and they say, you know what, I'm not going to try it either. And we've all seen this in our personal lives, right? You hear about something, you're like, okay, well, let's not try that. So how do you combat this? How do you deal with sales trauma? Well, I use a phrase called uncovery. Instead of discovery, I aim for uncovery. Uncovery is to ask people questions to kind of highlight, sort of vet if they've actually had bad experiences in the past. So for example, if I'm trying to sell a software product, or again, even being a pool builder, I would ask them, have you worked with a pool builder or pool designer in the past? If I'm selling software, B2B, have you worked with a software provider similar to ours in the past? I'm asking them to go back in the past. And if they say yes, what I want to do is, how was that experience? How did that work out? And if they say, well, it didn't work out as well as we wanted to, well, can I ask what happened? And then begin to kind of understand what were some of the underlying issues. And then in your presentation, you're going to overcome that. In other words, let's say the pool builders had a problem in the past, right? Bad experience in the previous home. They're going to say deliveries were late, contractors weren't really trained, the builders weren't polite, whatever it may be, all the reasons they come up with. And again, you can ask questions like, what can we do to ensure that this doesn't happen again? Or you can tell them, here's what we're going to do to make sure that doesn't happen again. When it comes to delivery, A, B, C, D, we're going to schedule this out. Now, here's a list of the 3 people who are going to be working on your project, and here's their background and their experience. You see what I did? Because I know they had direct trauma, I am not trying to resolve that trauma. So as we ask these uncovery questions, we're digging into the past to see if there's anything there that would hold them back from moving forward. So in other words, let's go to the adjacent, right? Well, is there any problem with moving forward? I'm building a pool. And they may say, yeah. I said, the problem is we've worked with other contractors. It just didn't go well. And again, you can go down the same road, asking the same questions, pulling it out of them, and then giving them a roadmap of how it might work. Or deal with the third one, recency. They were in a conversation. Someone says, today is not probably the best time to build a pool. And then there you can have that discussion. Well, here's why that information may not be up to date or correct. And here's how we'll make sure that your pool is delivered with quality and it's delivered on time. So you get the idea. When we're dealing with sales trauma, we have to go into the past. And sometimes salespeople don't want to do that. Let me tell you what happens when you don't do that. It kills the deal, kills the momentum later on. Again, logically, you've convinced them this is a great idea. Emotionally, they're like, yeah, let's do this. But because there's that trauma there that you haven't dealt with, that trauma is going to act like a pull, like a magnet that pulls them back into the status quo. In other words, to make no decision. And they'll say something like, you know what, we just decided that now is not a good time. What they're really saying is we've been traumatized and we've not dealt with the trauma. So in a sense, you got to be a sales psychologist. Go into the past, figure out if there's anything there that would hold them back from making a buying decision, and that will allow you to move the deal that much faster forward and keep the momentum going. On that note, this is Victor Antonio, always reminding you, selling ain't hard when you understand trauma and you know how to deal with it and you know how. Take care.